I'm a therapist who have seen hundreds of patients, and these are the top 10 lessons that I've learned while working with patients struggling with anxiety disorders that have been most helpful for them. So hopefully you find that these lessons are helpful to you too. Hi, if you're new here, my name is Parky. I'm a postdoctoral fellow in clinical psychology at Stanford University, and I've been studying and practicing evidence-based mental health for the better part of a decade. Again, love to share some of that information with you. So lesson number one is to avoid avoiding. So when we're afraid of something, of course we're gonna want to run away from it. We don't want to engage with the spider or the really attractive person or the presentation because we're afraid of what might happen. Like for example, the spider might bite us or the attractive person might think that we're really boring and lame and don't want to interact with us. So we escape and avoid from the possible consequences by not engaging with the situation, which reduces anxiety in the short term, but actually maintains anxiety in the long run. So when we avoid, it's kind of a short-term solution to get away with the danger in the moment, but that actually leads to greater pain down the road. And the thing about avoidance is that it can actually be a little bit sneaky. Like sometimes it's not outwardly an explicit avoidance of the entire situation. Like for example, you might still go to the party, but you might drink a lot of alcohol or only talk to your friend as sneaky ways to avoid actually interacting with people you don't know. Or if, for example, at work, maybe your type of avoidance is to actually check your email 50 times so that you can avoid any sort of uncertainty or fears about what could happen if you only checked once or twice. What if you make a mistake and then someone fires you, for example? Lesson number two is to be a curious experimenter. Oftentimes when we struggle with anxiety and worries, we kind of have all these negative, anxious predictions in our brain. We worry about what could happen as a potential negative consequence, and as a result, we assume that prediction to be true, and we don't do the thing. Like if I worry about interacting with that person because they think I'm going to be boring, I'm not going to engage with them. So one thing that can be often very helpful is to instill yourself a sort of curious scientist or curious experimenter perspective of saying, actually, my brain just made a hypothesis as to what might happen, a prediction. Why don't I test it just to see what happens? Maybe my brain is right, or maybe it's not. Either way, it's be helpful to get some more real world evidence to determine whether or not my brain was actually being accurate in that moment. So alongside lesson number two, lesson number three is that uncertainty is not inherently dangerous or negative. So oftentimes when we struggle with an anxiety disorder, like generalized anxiety disorder, a common construct that pops up is this intolerance to uncertainty. We see uncertainty as this sort of dangerous, allergic thing that we really don't want to engage with. And as a result, we use avoidance to rid ourselves of the uncertainty that something bad could happen. By being a curious experimenter, doing these little experiments and trying to open up our world, we get more and more data to suggest that one, sometimes uncertainty is not always a bad thing. And in fact, like it can actually be kind of exciting to not know what happens next. And number two, that even if it is a bad thing, even if the bad things happen, that you are resilient enough to deal with it. So you increase your resilience to uncertainty. Lesson number four is that anxiety actually serves a very healthy and adaptive function. It's designed to protect us safe, protect us from potential harm or dangers along the way. And it's not actually a goal in therapy to get rid of anxiety completely. When we struggle with an anxiety disorder, that suggests that it is excessive, it's too much relative to kind of the danger that you're actually experiencing. So we want to be able to reduce the noise a little bit, but ultimately having sort of this anxiety can be actually quite helpful, and it's a normal experience. So it's helpful to kind of recognize that some amount of anxiety is actually helpful. So we don't necessarily need to get rid of it all. So then lesson number five is that we want to change our relationship with anxiety. When we experience these anxious symptoms, we almost have like the secondary response to it. It's like, oh, this is so uncomfortable. I hate it. I really hate these experiences. And one thing that can be really helpful is to be able to almost sit with your anxiety and say, hey, like, thanks for coming here. Thanks for telling me that something maybe dangerous is around, and be able to almost change and become friends with your anxiety. Kind of treat it as like this annoying friend. One of my patients used to call, her anxiety like this annoying person that would like try and help, but sometimes be a little bit too overprotective. But that almost like shifted the way that she viewed anxiety rather than as an enemy, but rather as this sort of overprotective, annoying friend that it doesn't always have to be there, but you don't have to like hate it or argue against it, and just allow it to say its piece and then allow it to float away when it's ready. And then lesson number six, kind of along this line of anxiety being uncomfortable, is that anxiety is uncomfortable, but not life-threatening. People often have these worries that their anxiety symptoms is a signal for something even worse happening. And this is especially common in panic disorder, where there's a fear that the anxiety condition is a result of a potential heart attack or an aneurysm or something terrible happening to them. So one thing that's really nice to know is that anxiety is very uncomfortable, but ultimately it's not a life-threatening condition. And by being able to change the way that we think about the symptoms, we can kind of reduce the anxiety and not allow this sort of panic spiral to occur where we think something terrible is happening, become even more anxious, and then the sort of cycle of like strong negative thoughts, as well as even more and worsened physical symptoms, leads to an eventual panic attack. And lesson number 7 is that you can do it scared. And the idea behind this comes from the idea of acceptance and commitment therapy, that there are things that are out of our control that are going to be scary, but ultimately you are a human being who is resilient, who has free will, or at least, in some kind of like theoretical considerations, that you can do things even when you are scared, that our behaviors, our thoughts, and emotions are all interconnected, and that we don't have to think a certain way or feel a certain way for us to behave a certain way. So if there is something that is truly important to you, something that you really need to do regardless of how you feel, then you can do that thing regardless, and you can just do it scared. And this kind of reminds me of the show Game of Thrones, where Bran asks his father, "Can a man be brave when he's afraid?" And his father replies, "That's the only time a man can be brave, because it takes courage to do the things that we are afraid of." And that is what courage is. It's not doing it because you can just do it and you're not afraid. It's that even though you're fearful, even though you're scared, even though you feel like you're weak, to do the right things anyway that's consistent with your values and your goals. And number 8 is that consistent relaxation practice can be really helpful to generally reduce physiological arousal and get us down from this fight or flight mode, where things like diaphragmatic breathing or progressive muscle relaxation or some sort of guided meditation practice, all of those things can be really helpful to generally reduce that sort of fight or flight response. And the way to be able to do that is to find a time every day, even if it's for just a few minutes, that you can commit to doing a little bit of relaxation practice. And over time, that consistency will really lead to some significant benefits in your overall state of well-being. So lesson number 9 is that sometimes you just have to resolve the problem in order to reduce your anxiety. So there's some worries that are very productive, like they're things that you do actually have to deal with, like an appointment that you have to shift next week, or getting childcare for somebody, or finishing up a big project. Those things require you to solve the problem in order to feel better. So in those cases, you want to apply lesson number 1, avoid avoiding, and actually do the things you know you need to do to be able to reduce your overall anxiety. And the final 10 strategy that I find very helpful is the use of worry time, where you essentially say, hey, like I'm going to take the next 10 minutes, maybe it's in the early evening, where I just write down something that's been really bothering me and allow myself to let my thoughts and feelings float into the page in some sort of stream of consciousness manner. Because by really sitting with our worries, we get out of this sort of like nebulous state of like generally being anxious and actually hone in on all the feelings and thoughts and exposing ourselves to process the things that have been happening in our lives. And I find this to be a really helpful way to be able to sit with the anxiety, tolerate it, and actually come up with the reasons why we're afraid. Because when we actually see it on paper, then the nebulous, vague stuff becomes more crystal clear, which can actually reduce overall anxiety because it's no longer the unknown. You're kind of shedding a light into the cave. So those are the top 10 lessons I found to be really helpful with my patients when I'm working with them on their anxiety problems. I hope you found some of it helpful too. If you did, I encourage you to subscribe because I'll be talking more stuff about evidence-based mental health down the road. Bye-bye.